Hello and welcome to Fresh Perspectives. My name is Gail, and my guest today is a man named Mark Twichell, and our topic for the day is going to be have to do with the wind energy farms, I guess. Okay, thank you for coming on, Mark.
Well, you're very welcome, Gail. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm sure we're going to really educate people really well today, it sounds like.
Well, I think people have pretty much formed a lot of their own opinions, but hopefully we can toss in a few more details.
Make sure they know all the facts. Okay. Okay, you've been a vocal opponent of the wind industry. Why did you come to the position that you have now?
Well, my own awareness of industrial wind facilities started back in the late 70s when the United States first did research on constructing large industrial wind turbines, and it was in response to the Arab oil embargo, because the flow of oil was challenged, and they they wisely recognized that if we could develop an alternative source of energy, it would be to our advantage, even though oil is not a big player in the generation of electricity. But the large machines were awesome in size, and the engineering is truly impressive. But at the time, we were living on a very small farm in a very rural area in Perrysburg, just outside of Gowanda. And I started picturing what these machines would look like in my neighborhood. And it just felt so out of place. They were so incongruous. They were so disturbing. They were so disruptive of serenity. And I interpreted serenity to mean, that value of the natural environment that promoted the highest sense of well-being. And certainly an industrial facility in my rural neighborhood would do just the opposite of that.
Oh, okay. When I heard that, I interviewed Judy Einock last summer when she was running for New York State Assembly. And I got to ask her a bunch of questions, and one of them was about alternative energies. And I remember her making a comment about poor arc rate. I didn't really understand at the moment what she meant. I assumed that they would just put these things up outside, more on the edge of a town or something like that. But my husband and I drove through Arkwright back in September one day, and it's like, whoa. They were all over town. These wind turbines were all over town, and in people's lawns. I was shocked at the sight of it. So
yeah, it's, some of those machines are as close as 1,000 feet from people's homes, and it's very disruptive to the community, because some people feel that it's their right, of course, to do as they will with their property, perhaps disregarding the neighbor's right to enjoy their property, such that it's very damaging to the sort of relationships that small rural communities are built upon. It results in families being split apart. An uncle or a cousin wants a wind turbine, but what about the other family members that might be living nearby? It becomes very political. It becomes a very disruptive influence.
Yeah, I can imagine it would. Now, you have a photo of Arkwright that you want to show?
Yes, this is a picture that I took when I was in Arkwright just a couple nights ago. It's a very warm, soft April evening, and the home on the right of the photo used to be occupied by some friends of ours, and they sold that property as the turbines were being constructed.
Oh.
And I hope that they got a good price for it, because you know, property values do go down when homes are, you know, so close to the residence.
Oh,
But
yeah.
it was just so disturbing to me to see how close the turbines are to their home. This home was in the family for 4 generations. On an evening like this, they would have been outside doing the garden in back, or they raised horses, and you know, you might have seen some horses grazing on the pastures. Out the back of their home, the kitchen windows, the large windows showing the land that rises up to that forest at the top of the hill. These machines have now taken over. You know, they exert such a massive presence, such a destructive dominion over their sense of well-being and security and comfort. I remember when we lived in a residence like that, I could feel coming home from work, you know, I could just feel how relaxed I became. Turning up our road, it was like, you know how you feel when you know, the stress of the day is relieved. I just can't imagine being in that situation there, coming home and having to deal with those machines turning, flickering shadows, and then at night it doesn't stop because the lights, you know, are blinking all night long. And that home was surrounded on the other side of the photograph as well. There were 7 turbines within view of that home.
Yeah, I counted about 5 looking at the picture. You know, all within a really small space.
Yes. Yes. This family had done their homework. They had visited other neighborhoods in other parts of the state and talked to people. They knew that the turbines were going to make a lot of noise. They felt that the noise was going to be disruptive to them and perhaps harmful to their animals as well. So they felt that their only recourse was to move.
Oh, okay. So that is the reason that they moved then, was they didn't want to live amongst the... Okay, let's see. Now, let's see. We have combined questions that Mark made up and questions that I made up. So now, what about the length of the windmill blades? Now, we were on our way to somewhere last spring one time where we saw one of these blades being hauled to wherever it was going to be put up. Just one blade, and I swear to you, it looked like it was about the length of a semi.
Or perhaps 2 or 3 semis.
2 or 3 semis. I mean, it was huge. It was really huge.
The total wingspan, if you take the diameter of the rotor of the whole machine, it's as wide as a 747. They're just enormous, and of course they're getting bigger all of the time.
Ew.
You know, when New York State first started installing them, the tallest of them were maybe 450 feet, and now they're asking for 600-foot tall machines. And with the taller machine go those bigger blades. With the larger blades go more noise and more shadow flicker cast upon the neighborhood.
Well, I remember being on the school bus as a little girl and going past that whole row in front of an apple orchard of tall, narrow trees. And I remember every morning that would really bother me a lot, that shadow flicker. It would bother my eyes a lot.
Yes, some people are very sensitive to that, and of course, at the extreme end are people that have conditions, you know, seizure disorders such as epilepsy that can be triggered by these rapidly flickering shadows. I was surprised to hear from the residents of Arkwright how much the shadow flicker was a disturbing influence. I had always thought that the noise was the overriding concern, and it is. But you know, shadow flicker is really not something to be, you know, taken casually.
No, I guess not, because I know what it felt like. Now, how much? No, that doesn't come next. Why do you refer to the wind industry instead instead of wind turbines?
Because the machines themselves, the turbines themselves, are disruptive and have so many negative qualities. But in order to stand back and see what do these machines represent, they represent an industry which is, like all industries, mediated by political and by politics and lobbyists. And the way that the industry relates to communities is very disruptive, as we talked, just a moment ago in Arkwright. The leaseholder signs away the rights to their property when they sign a lease to have a turbine on their property. And worse than that, the leaseholder acknowledges all of the negative impact of the turbine, the noise, vibration, shadow flicker, but is not allowed to complain about it. All of the leases have gag orders, non-disclosure clauses. The industry then attempts to quiet any complaints in the community by offering what they call good neighbor agreements, where if you are a neighbor of a wind turbine but you're not a participant, you can receive $1,000 a year as long as you don't complain to anyone. You're not going to give an interview, or you're not going to speak up at the town hall about
They'd have to agree not to be on Fresh Perspectives.
That's correct. You'll not see them here at your table, Gail. The problem with that, of course, is that it's very hard to get an accurate demographic picture of the total impact of this industry, because if people can't speak freely, then how do you know how many people are having health impacts, or how do you know how many people are suffering loss of serenity, or disrupted, family lives? Because in a small rural community, everybody feels quite close, and nobody really wants to, make it more difficult for their neighbors.
Yeah, right. I imagine there could be some feuds going on.
There are irreparable, harms done to friendships and family relations, and that's every wind industrialized community deals with that. That's certainly not unique to Arkwright. Arkwright, of course, has a special. It's been referred to as Arkwright because of the very disruptive and years-long process where a lot of negative emotions and politics entered into people's equations. The town board of Arkwright, of course, became involved. There were 10 Arkwright municipal officers who have leases with the wind company. Those 10 people were listed by the New York State Attorney General as having, received money in exchange for voting in favor of the wind turbine project. That becomes a very toxic, element in local politics. Not that local politics isn't, already, obviously that's the nature of the game. You're going to disagree, but now you have money and basically a forever situation that has, fractured the community.
Yeah. Okay. Now, people were paid $10,000 to have these wind turbines put on their property, and you said that that's $10,000 a year per wind turbine?
That's a fairly rough estimate.
It's a rough estimate?
And some leases are written such that the payment relates to how much power is generated.
Oh, I see.
And then the industry, of course, can influence their payment, because the wind turbine obviously doesn't run all the time, and even when it runs, it may not. The fact that you see it spinning does not necessarily mean that it's generating electricity. So we know that what they call capacity factor, every given machine has an ability to generate electricity at a certain factor, and in New York State that averages out to be about 25% of what the actual rating of the machine is.
Okay. Do you think the property owners were paid enough?
That's a tough question, Gail, because for some families $10,000 is a big deal. You know, we live in an area that borders Appalachia. These are I am sympathetic to the small family farmers who've had these operations for generations, never had a chance to make any money, totally dominated by the politics of the milk pricing, scenario. And all of a sudden somebody comes up and says, hey, we got $10,000 for you if you take one turbine, if you have enough land, and if it's in the right place, 2 or 3 turbines. Now all of a sudden this family can talk about traveling to Florida for a couple of weeks, or maybe sending one of their kids to school. So that part I get. However, the impact upon the community as a whole and the impact of the neighbors far outweighs, in my opinion, whatever money they're receiving.
Okay. Is the company planning on expanding to other nearby communities?
Once the industry establishes, a foothold or a footprint in a community, it is that much easier to expand. So the fact that Arkwright has 36 turbines now, they could obviously put many more in. However, the Chautauqua County Legislature last year, by a unanimous vote, approved a resolution limiting the Industrial Development Agency such that they can no longer grant pilot agreements, that's payment in lieu of taxes, to wind energy facilities larger than 5 megawatts, which is basically any application of 2 turbines is no longer going to receive the kind of tax breaks that the Chautauqua County citizens have been burdened by.
Oh.
So in trying to answer your question, it will be more difficult, at least in Chautauqua County. And Cattaraugus County has done the same. There's 3 other counties in New York State that have also restricted their industrial development agencies in terms of keeping them from entering into pilot agreements with wind developers.
Okay. Okay. Is it possible, it is possible to stop this expansion then?
Well, right now in Chautauqua County, there's already 3 wind facilities that have been approved. The Arkwright facility, of course, has been constructed and began operation just this past September in 2018. The other 2 facilities are still in the permit phase. That would be the Cassadaga Wind facility, which is the first Article 10 facility to receive approval in New York State. And the Ball Hill facility, which is an older permit process involving the State Environmental Quality Review Act, or what we call the SEQR.
Okay. Would you say that these companies have been inconsiderate of the local people?
Totally inconsiderate in that the restrictions they place on the freedom of people to express, how they feel about the turbines. The amount of money that these developers make, this is all, just a tax write-off scam. Warren Buffett, he of, billionaire investor, fame, has said that the only reason that we fund the construction of wind facilities is because of the tax advantage. They make no sense otherwise, and those are his words.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, I remember seeing, about the noise situation. There was a cartoon, it was on the order of one of those political cartoons in one of the newspapers a few weeks back, where it was somebody who'd come out from the wind company or something, and he's saying, I can't hear anything.
The wind industry is very adept at manipulating data such that it's almost impossible to force compliance upon the company. For example, in the town of Arkwright, the wind company is not allowed to run their machines louder than 50 decibels. but that's an expression of how much louder the machine is than the ambient noise level.
Oh, okay.
Now, the ambient noise level to you and I is how loud is it when we step outside.
Okay.
But to the wind company, the ambient noise level is how loud is it at the rotor height, which is,
okay.
you know, 200 feet in the air. So it's
Okay.
always going to be noisier there. So it's easier for the wind company to say, see, we're not making more noise than what is allowed. Also, the wind company is counting on the fact that people may not be aware that if the ambient temperature in the ambient noise level in their backyard might be 20 decibels, for example. You know, in a quiet rural area, 20 decibels, 25 decibels would be very common. They've received approval by the town board to make 50 decibels of noise. 50 decibels is 8 times louder than 20 decibels. That's a logarithmic scale. That's not an arithmetic scale. So people didn't understand that the audible noise alone is 8 times louder than what they might have been used to. And that doesn't even account for that section of the noise which is not audible. The acoustic energy that the wind turbine emits is not all within the range of human hearing. In fact, the largest portion of the acoustic energy of an industrial wind turbine is subaudible in the infrasound range, and that carries with it a whole range of well-recognized health problems.
Well, I don't know how you feel about it, but when I step outside my house, what I like to hear is nature's sounds, is what I like to hear. So
Peepers are nice in the spring.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
You realize that the audible sound of the wind turbine, it's not like the wind salesman says, you know, these only are as loud as a refrigerator. You think of a refrigerator at, you know, and they'll say 40 decibels is your refrigerator. Yes, but do you sleep with your refrigerator? Is the refrigerator in your room when you're sleeping?
No. And
is your refrigerator on a timer such that it turns off and back on every 5 seconds? No. You know, how you characterize noise in terms of its ability to disturb isn't necessarily just expressed by how loud it is. It's the intermittency of the noise. That's called amplitude modulation is the term that acoustic scientists relate to. That every whoosh that you hear when you step out of your car in Arkwright and you're interested, well, what do these sound like? You hear a whooshing sound. That whoosh is broken down by acoustic scientists into milliseconds of time. And the whoosh is actually composed of a very high peak of noise and then a very low peak of noise, and then back to a high peak. Your ear only hears it as a whoosh. But your brain interprets it differently because your brain is wired to very minute differences in sound, and that's particularly annoying is the sound of a wind turbine.
Okay. So what were the citizens thinking when they agreed to go along with this? It was mainly that they could earn some money then?
I believe that you know, financial compensation is a prime motivator for someone wanting to lease their land to a wind developer. We can't discount the well-intentioned motivations of people who wish to promote a greener environment, who wish to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions involved in generating electricity. Certainly in Arkwright there were many people who really wanted to improve our environment by generating electricity that didn't emit carbon dioxide.
Do you live in Arkwright?
No, but we have, you know, several friends in Arkwright. And from the property that we still own, that I referred to earlier in Perrysburg, we still own the property. We can see the turbines on the horizon, and the Ball Hill project will bring the turbines even closer to us, and perhaps even within the sound range.
Oh, okay. Now, does eminent domain play a role?
Not up to this point. The financial compensation for people has been enough so that people will comply with the developer's plan. But eminent domain is very often required in the installation of overhead transmission lines, and that's one of the big disadvantages of wind energy, because the site of generation in Arkwright is a long way from where the power is actually needed. And in fact, the power it cannot actually get from Arkwright to New York City, which needs power. Western New York, we don't need power here. We've got Niagara Falls, and we have a very large coal-fired power plant just across the border in Pennsylvania, which, interestingly enough, does not count against the governor's plan to institute, all green energy by the year 2040. He can import coal-generated electricity from out of state, and that doesn't count against New York's, portfolio of green energy. So as we speak, these very bright lights are being powered primarily by a coal-powered plant in Pennsylvania, with some power entering the grid also from Niagara Falls. Do the wind turbines actually generate power? Of course they do, but they cannot generate power by themselves, because the power grid can only function if the amount of power that's being put into the grid exactly matches the amount of power that's going out of the grid. If the wind turbines are spinning, if the wind is 10 miles an hour, they're spinning right along, but 20 minutes later, the wind dies down. What does that do to the power grid? It would cause the power grid to collapse. If it weren't for the fact that you had that coal plant in Homer, Pennsylvania, still burning coal. In other words, it's like having, when you're riding your bike downhill, you can pedal. That might be the influence of a wind turbine. But if your legs get tired, you're still going downhill thanks to gravity. Without cogeneration, the wind turbine is basically useless. The advertisements such that, this wind facility will power 10,000 homes. Well, no, it will power 0 homes by itself. Without cogeneration through, a gas plant, a coal plant, nuclear plant, supplementation from hydro, the wind facility itself is basically worthless.
Did they get the idea for this wind energy from was it the Netherlands that used to have old-fashioned windmills? Did the idea come from that?
The reason that wind power as a popular source of energy is no longer widely used is because of internal combustion. As soon as the steam engine, which is actually external combustion engine, but as soon as steam power became widespread, the sailing ships became basically sources of recreation. Windmills became sources of tourism dollars, and steam power took over the day.
Well, what were the people in the Netherlands actually using the power from their windmills for? Do you know?
Windmills are actually, traditional windmills are actually quite good at pumping water.
At pumping water.
And so the Dutch were, ingenious at damming off sections of swampland and low-lying tidal areas, and then just pumping the water out of it and creating new land. Certainly wind power played a huge part of that, and in the exploration of the planet, all the sailing discoveries, but the wind energy is so diffuse. I mean, it takes 10,000 acres to institute a wind facility, whereas the NRG coal plant, which is now obviously dormant in Dunkirk, would generate 4 times the amount of electricity as a wind facility, but it only occupied 1,000 acres.
Do you believe that climate change is due to the use of fossil fuels and their carbon dioxide emissions?
Yes, I do. I have too much respect for an international coalition of scientists that have worked on this for decades. Having said that, I cannot discount the fact that there are other elements in the way the Earth is put together, the way the Earth functions. There's a huge, enormous amount of carbon dioxide released by volcanic activity, tectonic activity. We tend to focus on power generation as the big, issue. As if we could only generate electricity by not burning gas or coal, we'd save the planet. But agriculture, the use of fossil fuels in agribusiness, there would be no agriculture as we know it without fossil fuels. The use of oil to manufacture fertilizer, the obvious use of gasoline to run all the manner of farm equipment, the amount of energy devoted to raising cattle for dairy and for meat production, and the emissions of the animals themselves. That's all has to be considered, so that it's unfortunate that folks think that if we could only use wind power or solar power to generate our electricity, that we could make a significant difference in carbon dioxide emissions, and I just don't believe that's true.
Yeah, being with the American Vegan Society, it's my understanding, according to experts that I've had the opportunity to talk to and whose books that I have read, animal agriculture actually is at least 60% of the contributing factor of global climate change. And, not just because of all the fuel that's used, but because of the greenhouse gases provided by the animals themselves, and now for cutting down the rainforest and so forth, and eliminating trees that are providing oxygen for the planet. Now, we've heard of this Ocasio-Cortez. People think that she means she wants to kill all of the cows, which she doesn't. What she is wanting to do is just cut down on consuming. With the factory farms, they're like artificially inseminating animals, and so that there are more of them being born than would be naturally. So basically, that's causing an overpopulation of the animals. And so basically, that's my opinion on that. That's a big contributing factor right there. So it would be a big help if people moved more towards a plant-based diet, and people who, like the factory farmers, went to producing other products.
I agree. It doesn't seem, however, that cultural trends are moving in that direction.
No, I know, unfortunately.
There's a huge third world that wants to have the same advantages in their lifestyle that we do, and that extends obviously beyond enjoying meat as often as Western cultures do, but they want refrigeration as well. They want to have transportation. These are almost entirely fossil-based parts of their industry and their culture, and who are we to deny them of that? If we think that we can go to a third world country and institute windmills and solar to power a developing economy, that's never been done before, and I don't believe that can be done now. It's who are we to deprive most of the planet from attaining the same level of affluence and comfort that we enjoy?
Of course, it might be a detriment to them though, too, because animal-based foods are a major contributing factor to all of the serious diseases.
No doubt. And it goes, diet is a personal choice, and it's a reflection of lifestyle. I get that. I believe that it's a personal choice to reside in an environment that supplies nurturing relationship with nature and serenity. And I don't believe that the wind industry is at all the coefficient of that.
Yeah. Okay, is there evidence to show that wind energy reduces carbon dioxide emissions?
There is no evidence that I have seen anywhere on the planet of an industrialized nation which has instituted wind power and or solar power and reduced its carbon dioxide significantly. The examples of Germany, for example, and Australia, even the United States, as you have seen steadily the wind industry brag about the percentage of electricity that they generate. That's true. Obviously, if you put up more wind turbines, you can generate a higher percentage of your electricity using wind. But what they don't say is the fact that as the turbines are spinning, they are still burning fossil fuels. It is not a displacement. It is false to think that for every hour the wind turbine is spinning, that same hour at the nearest fossil fuel plant, that they're not burning fossil fuels. They certainly are.
Okay.
And to give you a bit of statistical relevance, a wind developer in northern New York State recently published the fact that their facility, which is a 100 megawatt facility, roughly the same size as the Ball Hill project here in Chautauqua County, which has yet to be built, 100 megawatts, slightly smaller than the Arkwright project. But that project, the 100 megawatt wind project, will reduce the total New York State carbon dioxide power generating emissions by 0.05%. And that is even an inflated reduction because the developer did not account for the fact that the fossil fuel plant is still burning fuel even while his machines are spinning, and that the fossil fuel plant is supplying electricity to his facility even when the wind is not spinning. The lights have to blink. All of the control mechanisms are electronically driven. The wind facility does not go dormant when there is no wind. It still needs power. So it's drawing current from the grid. We're supporting these facilities even when they're not generating.
Okay. So why do you state that wind turbines are bad for the environment?
Well, everybody knows that wind turbines kill birds. Of course, the wind industry likes to say that cats kill more birds than do wind turbines, and that is true. However, cats do not kill eagles or hawks. The wind turbine industry, the wind industry, has no answer to the issue of bats. Bats are extremely important. They have an economic value and they have an environmental value. And right now in New York State, in combination with the white nose syndrome, which is a fungus disease that has decimated bat populations across the state. You add the growing influence of the wind industry to white nose syndrome, and several biologists have said that it's almost unsustainable. We risk losing the populations of bats. That aside from white nose, the wind industry is the single cause of death of bats in New York State and elsewhere in the country as well.
Yeah, we live out in the country, about 3 miles outside of town on a country road, and we have not seen any bats at our house in approximately, I think, 3 or 4 years, actually, and they used to be all over the place out there.
We saw one sitting in our backyard the other night and we cheered.
Oh, did you really?
It's a bat. But beyond the actual mortality of the spinning blades goes the habitat fragmentation. You know, that needs to be considered as well. I mentioned 10,000 acres for a 100 megawatt wind facility, but all of those turbines sit on reinforced ground. They have to build an interstate highway system linking one turbine to the next in order to truck the huge blades that you mentioned, how large they are. They have to clear cut forest areas such that it totally deprives the local environment of the kind of consistency that it needs. You've taken away the integrity of the environment.
Yeah, I can just imagine. So, how noisy are the wind turbines? I guess we were going to show a video now.
Yes, thanks to our friends, and I need to say again how important it is for the public to understand, and nobody does a better job of this than our friends Karen and Roy Harvey, who are videographers who have been following the wind story in Chautauqua County for the last 2 years. And they have followed us to town hall meetings, county meetings, protest meetings. They've interviewed people, and I'm hoping that we can see a brief clip, perhaps 3 or 4 minutes, of a recent production that they did in Arkwright, where they interviewed several folks and asked them to describe what their life is like since the wind turbines became operational in September.
We had a beautiful place to live. Now we're looking at 12 500-foot tall industrial wind turbine towers on one side of our house. And on the other side, there's 100-foot tall transmission line towers. We were never notified of any of this.
If I would have had any idea that at 70 years old, I wouldn't have a place where I wanted to live, that I've worked all my life for, I wouldn't have the environment that we live on Cable Road for. It was pristine. It was beautiful. You heard the birds chirp in the morning. It's changed. Everything has changed for me. And now I can't sleep at night. I have to live with a ringing in my ears all the time. I don't feel really good anymore unless I come sit and just try and find a quiet place. And there is no quiet place anymore up here. It's constant, and they're changing, and the noise are changing. My health and my life has just deteriorated.
I can't live like this. It's just, I can't go with no sleep and every day and try to function normally and go to work and stuff. It's just, it's bad.
I have a lot of anxiety. It's changed the feel, the peace of my home. I don't know. It's the peace and quiet of my home is gone. This morning when I got up and it's foggy, I can't see them. And for some reason they weren't really moving, and it was very quiet, and I almost called my appointment to cancel so I didn't have to work, so I could stay home and enjoy the quiet because it's so rare. That's what it's like at my house.
The noise factor is every day constant. Every now and then they might stop one, but then when they stop that one, I hear 4 others. I'm umbrellaed by five turbines, all within 2,000 feet of my house. So it's a constant roar.
Well, the number one issue I would say for us in terms of physical impact is the noise. It's so much noisier. I mean, we moved, both of us grew up in cities. I work in a city, I work in Buffalo. We came here because, it was like going on vacation at the end of the day. It was remote and quiet. We had dark sky and silence and still, and that's over.
And now I don't know. Now it's like if they don't shut them off, I don't know what I'm going to do, because my life is just, we don't have a future anymore. life was just bad.
And that's my well-being, and they've taken that away from me. You know, all during deer season, I sit in my tree stands and I just listen to these things, and I record them, and I videotape the flicker, and it's taken away so much of the enjoyment of our life and what I enjoy up here, and that's gone. You know, and I think that's related to your health. It's your health and well-being.
And yes, it does sound like a jetliner, except it is not a jetliner that ever lands, but one that circles our home endlessly. On any windy day, and especially when the wind is out of the south-southeast, my life is typified by headaches and nausea, and I currently average about 6 hours of restless sleep a night. The thought of being sleep deprived for the next 25 years is daunting.
Well, that was pretty interesting. I wanted you to say some things about, you were telling me about how dangerous the wind turbines can be for people also before we started recording the program. Like I asked you if those huge mammoth blades can they come loose and fall and drop on somebody and kill them?
Yes, there's a lot of concern because accidents happen, and the setback distance for these machines is within the throw distance. If a blade comes off, it could conceivably travel and hit somebody's house. Mm-hmm. The blades ice up in the winter, and if the ice thaws, eventually it will, of course, and the ice can be thrown off the blade and hit somebody's house. Mm-hmm. The turbine can catch fire. In fact, of all the turbine-related accidents, fire is the most common. And now you've got flaming debris being thrown, and it's just so wrong to have the turbines being permitted within the safety distance. For example, the turbine manufacturer has a distance of over 1,600 feet, so that the technician is instructed, if the technician is responding to an accident at a wind turbine, they must close the roads and they must evacuate anybody that lives within 1,600 feet of the machine due to the hazard of something being thrown or falling off of the machine. And yet we're allowing people to have wind turbines, 1,000 feet from their homes.
Which is a lot closer than the technicians are allowed to go to it then.
Yes, the technicians are also advised, if the wind turbine is spinning, not to approach it from the side. In other words, not to put themselves in the plane of rotation. You always approach a spinning turbine from the front, mm-hmm. so that if there was a malfunction, that the technician wouldn't be harmed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So actually, people's houses and things could be caught on fire.
What the wind industry says when they talk to the town halls, the town board members who are responsible for writing the local wind law that determines how far away the turbine must be, they say that there are no recorded cases of injury or death. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that it can't happen. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem common sense to put the machine in a place where that can't happen. Why wait until it does happen, mm-hmm. which is inevitable due to the fact that you must put these machines in a windy place. Mm-hmm. You must put these machines fairly close to the existing transmission lines. Mm-hmm. It's very burdensome, and I believe very unjust, that many urban or suburban areas could host industrial wind turbines. For example, there is one on the shores of Lake Erie in Lackawanna, mm-hmm. yet most urban and suburban areas value their property so much that they will not allow a wind facility to be constructed within their jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is there some reason that they wanted to put them on people's properties instead of out in the country more somewhere?
Well, it's very difficult for the wind developer to find a place. It's the myth of the vacant land. It's the myth of putting them out there somewhere. That's what people want. Folks want to know that they're doing the right thing by the planet. They don't necessarily want it in their own yard. You know, everybody's a NIMBY to some extent. But as long as they put them out there somewhere, then that satisfies their need to feel that they're contributing to the betterment of the planet. But out there somewhere, there's folks out there. They're rural folks. There truly, statistically, aren't many people who are going to be negatively impacted by the noise. In the big picture, it's a fairly small number of people. But you saw the folks on Karen and Roy's video. Where is the justice for those people? Is this a case of the common good? In other words, some people must suffer so that we can save the planet? Or some people must be disadvantaged so that the larger majority of people can feel that they've done what is right? There is the concept of the common good, and I don't believe that this qualifies. You can't have a common good unless you acknowledge who is going to be harmed, by what means are they going to be harmed, and what can we do to mitigate that harm. And the wind industry is quiet on all of those issues, and the politicians are quiet on those issues. This is an environmental scam. It's a consumer fraud. It's underwritten by politicians and lobbyists at the request of well-intentioned people who are concerned about the planet. But the people in the video are the ones that are bearing the weight of this. For what? For 0.05% reduction in New York State's total generating carbon footprint? Is that the best we can do?
Well, from my point of view, I feel that every single individual is important, and nobody should have to be made to suffer for the benefit of, not even a small amount, for the benefit of saving the planet or whatever. But it still remains to be seen whether or not this is going to do any good or not. I do think solar panels are probably a good idea, but they're not spinning.
Solar panel, most of the folks that are really opposed to the wind industry will give the solar industry a little bit, but it's still an intermittent power source. In other words, it's dark 12 hours of the day.
Oh, yeah,
Where is that power coming from?
Yeah.
And then you might say, well, but there's a wind facility nearby that makes up for the power of now that the sun is down. But what if the wind and the sun aren't there? Are you willing to go without your refrigerator for a few days? Because without that coal plant or that gas plant, you're not going to have a 20th century or 21st century lifestyle.
No, I suppose not. How can people learn more about the wind industry and wind turbines? I've got a list. Facebook. Were they going to show these things? Oh, yeah, there it is. Facebook, Concerned Citizens of Cassadaga Wind Project.
That's a pretty good source. You'll see a lot of people in Arkwright will contribute to that Facebook page. That page hosts a lot of reports out of New York State and from around the world describing the efficiency or lack of efficiency of the wind industry and its effect upon people. The Cassadaga page contains a lot of useful information about the politics of the wind industry. And there's a couple other sources that I threw on there too.
There's wiseenergy.org.
wiseenergy.org is a website run by a gentleman named John Droz, who has been an opponent of the wind industry for decades, and he has published a very extensive library of references to the politics of the wind industry, the adverse health effects of the wind turbine noise, the consumer fraud of hundreds of billions of dollars being spent by politicians and lobbyists for a project that has almost zero environmental benefit. And it's all packaged on one readily accessible page. A lot of very useful information for communities that are being challenged by wind industry in terms of how should the community structure its regulations. What is a protective wind law? How can we protect our citizens from harm?
Okay, there's a couple more here. One is the Cassadaga Wind Project. And
these references, Gail,
and
are
the Ball Hill Wind Project. Yes.
These are both references that the New York State Public Service Commission publishes, and these are online, and they are a wealth of information. If you want to follow, for example, the progress of the Cassadaga Wind Project, all you need to do is enter on your search engine New York State Department of Public Service and the case number. In the case of Cassadaga, of course, 14F0490. In the case of Ball Hill, enter New York State Department of Public Service, case number 18E0654. And each of these pages will have transcripts of hearing procedures, the various testimonials, expert witnesses that testify in cases of noise, how communities structure their wind laws. There's an endless amount of information provided by the New York State Department of Public Service.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. Is there anything else you want to say to the viewing audience before we close?
Well, I want to thank you, Gil, for providing this opportunity. The more the public is educated on this issue, the better it is for everybody. Mm-hmm. I honestly believe that the wind industry has misled the public, and that it's time for scientists to decide how to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, not politicians and industrial lobbyists.
The people who make money off of it.
Exactly.
It seems like that's how it is with a lot of things, is it's all about the money. So thank you for coming on, and we've come to the end of another episode of Fresh Perspectives, and I'll see the rest of you in the viewing audience on the next episode in a couple of weeks.